This week, Flying Wild Hog is bringing us Shadow Warrior 3. The first-person shooter is here shortly for all platforms, plus day one for PlayStation Now. Wang, the main character, is about 1/4 Jack Burton, 2/5 Bruce Lee, and if that math doesn't make sense, don't worry, not much in Shadow Warrior 3 does, and that's fine. The game starts out with Wang having a nervous breakdown, talking to himself, standing around in his mysteriously stained whitey-tighties, and then he leaps into a massive God of War level with him running along a dragon's back, and that's like in the first minute. If you like videos, if you like reviews and previews, subscribe to the channel. Upcoming, you're going to see an Elden Ring walk in the walk, as well as a couple more reviews. Looking at this game just graphically, the presentation style is built a little bit like old martial arts movies. You have these colorful movie marquees that flash up on the screen announcing any new type of monster, and the game has almost seamless transitions between Wang kicking in a door and then the cutscene starts, with that giving everything this unique moving forward flow to it. I love the graphics, color, effects. It's all very much in your face though. Maybe a little too much, because the game can get downright hectic, and it does like its screen effects, which can make it a little bit difficult to read when you're running and gunning through a giant mob of enemies. Each game out there, that's first person in particular, tries to show a very particular and unique feel to it, and I actually think that holistic frenzy fits Shadow Warrior 3 perfectly. But I can see some people finding that a little bit distracting. But try not to get too distracted even when you're tearing off and out the body parts of enemies to perform specials, and you can use those body parts against other people. One of the best is an enemy where you punch through his face, you grab the churning motor inside and shoot everybody with it. 1 second leaping off a cliff, swinging around Indiana Jones style to enter the same battle you just left, but from the other side. Following a thieving trash panda through sparkling blue caves as it leads you into ambush after ambush. Shadow Warrior 3 is anything if not eclectic in its offerings. And in its speed. Speed kills. Sometimes that's a warning, other times it's just a description of what's going to happen. In the game, areas close off and it's your time. Enemies warp in, slink, slide, pop, and float into existence around you. It is easily Unreal 1999 fast. Maybe more like Unreal 1999 with a speed modifier set to about 150. So that's perfect for me. Also, I love the creature designs. They're just so weird. It's not all Asian mythology, but some of it is. Along with that, it mixes in all kind of different cyborgish stuff, as well as some really off-the-wall enemy designs. At one point, Jack-in-the-boxes leave their boxes at home and slink downstairs into the battle with you, and taking them out tears them in half. It's just so satisfying. And tearing apart off an enemy and beating somebody else to death with it is awesome. I also thought that the actual weapon effects were pretty good as well. They don't necessarily go completely off the rail when it comes to the weapon design. Handguns, machine guns, shotguns, rail guns, and an assorted bevy of different items that you can use, as well as your sword, which not only comes in handy, it's actually quite good here. Speaking of quite good, the action and the pace. Performance on this game is exceptional. 90 to 100 FPS, native 4K with a 3080, and going above multiple times even from there. While a 1080 can easily hit about 60 most of the time with those effects actually cranked up. But if you're looking on killing cooked with a side of high temperature FPS and you want something even more, you can do DLSS and FSR. They're in there. DLSS's quality mode nets you about 30 FPS more above the native rendering, where FSR gave me anywhere from 10 to 15. AMD's CAS is also included if you want to try that. And it's good that the game can keep up, because you are always keeping up. It is super fast. To explain that this game is speedy is such an understatement. However, it does have a couple stutters. These are where you're going to notice, especially not when you're shooting enemies, but when you're jumping into a new cutscene. You may get that start as it's loading in the level in the background and then showing the movie on top of that. And I certainly did notice some stutter in those. While I like the look of the game, sadly, chromatic aberration is tied into the picture settings for the effect slider for post-processing. So dropping that down does lose you some other effects. And if there's two things I would say here graphically, that's one of them that I wasn't happy with. I like a lot of the guns, but a few of them don't really have a great deal of recoil. It's just not that much. You can get a couple guns, but they feel a little bit like lasers or some kind of beam weapon. Don't get me wrong, they kick, but mostly are just sort of slightly shaking the wrist. And when you're shooting a gun that people would normally have to secure grip on the best of days, it can look a little bit deceiving or a little bit odd. Luckily, with the actual frantic pace of this game, you probably won't be noticing it too much. It's enjoyable, it is up to its gills with enemies, and presentation through the roof. The sound is actually pretty good. Here you can hear some of the surround. It's working well, though there isn't much height value on the right and left. It's good for 2.1 or headphone systems. Some guns have ricochet sounds if you hit the walls versus the characters themselves, though you really can't use that because it's so fast. By the time you've missed or by the time you realize you're hitting the wall, somebody's probably behind you shooting you. Enemies all have distinct sounds that warn you early if they're coming, like some serious Sam style of enemies with explosives already lit and just suicide bombing their way into your fastest clip. A lot of games like this, I'm always really interested in how the music holds up. Does it hold up in the battles and the exploration? I would say here, the track has a number of good tracks overall. Some of those are sort of clicking together the way they should. But admittedly, when you really listen to it, it's a bit all over the place with dipped in native flavored sampled instruments and then heavy techno beats sometime beneath that hit and miss track factory. While none of them were excellent, I probably won't be listening to any of this outside of the actual game. Voices. Voices are important, especially when you have a protagonist like this. Whether it's Duke Nukem or some other character, these characters have to breathe a life in to make really the world and their reactions to it sing, to make it make sense. He sounds creepy, but seriously, I enjoy Wang. His jokes hit and miss at more hit than miss accuracy, but not everyone is actually going to like some of the stuff he says. Like BJ or Serious Sam, but much more talkative, explaining what's happening, dropping one-liners as he kills enemies, and other times pretending to sell various items on late-night TV show programs. He is at his best, though, in the first half, where some of what's going on and what he says is just so audacious and out there, it's laugh-out-loud funny. This leans out towards the end of the game, and that is some kind of repeated pattern you're going to notice throughout this review. And a review's got to cover gameplay, so let's do it. So the game starts out with Wang in his bedroom clothes, stained and floppy. He's throwing a fit because everything he's done in the past games really haven't worked out. And instead of ridding the world of evil, he's set loose a celestial dragon and thinks everyone in the world is dead, so why help? Enter in a friend of his or two to describe how they may help destroy this dragon. And Wang quickly picks up his weapons and says, let's do this. And the game opens up to an awesome tutorial teaching you the basic ropes in this epic fight. There's moving around from location to location, lots of platforming and stopping periodically to take out enemies in the game. And you learn that right from the start. First, the platforming in the game is awesome for two reasons. One, other than some late game difficult jumps, it's not about Wang shriveling up and dying. It's about him moving across the world at full speed, wall walking, climbing, leaping. They're all handled in a very loose, very generous sort of way, with Indiana Jones swings and other movement abilities added in as you go, and everything having a really wide grip factor, meaning that if you come close to grabbing onto the wall, most likely you will. And that sets up the gamer to look and feel like they're even better than, well, they probably are. Once you jump into combat, it is frenzied, it's fun, it is also all over the place. You usually get introduced to new enemies by them showing you one way to execute them, and then you have this giant battle. I do wish the arenas were larger, though. With so many enemies, and some of them like Serious Sam characters, other flying around like Aladdin on futuristic magic carpets, it can get incredibly hard to see exactly what's shooting you or what you're shooting at. It's always fun, but if some of the locations were a bit wider open, I think it would have been amazing, especially because many of the locations have these huge traps that you can set off to kill the enemies. But because it's also damned close, they can hurt you too, or you can't get a free line of fire to actually trigger them. When you have the space or you get up in someone's face and you're slicing and dicing, it does feel super enjoyable. Switching out to the guns is instant. There really isn't even an animation for that. If you're holding the gun and you switch to the sword, or you're holding the sword and switching to the gun, it's pretty much just right there. This is not a game about showing long, drawn-out animations as somebody pulls up their weapon and reloads it. And that kind of design decision sort of goes throughout the entire title. In many shooters, there is that language that developers want to give. Smart, precise movements make way for long-range shots and finesse. Shadow Warrior is not that. It's balls to the wall. It's changing the speed and the point of indication and impact in moments, in a blur, up close and far away, then middle ground, mixing and matching weapons and key bursts so that you can lob that one last explosive grenade into a group and hope it won't possibly kill you and that you created enough distance. Now, when Wang isn't arguing over the semantics of wervens versus dragons like a bad Critical Role episode, he's shooting those enemies. Weapons range from handguns, machine guns, your sword, laser guns, enemies insides that you can rip out, like I said before. What I liked is that there's very little bits of finesse here and there. For example, if you attack then hold the button at the same point when you're using your sword, Wang stops in a particular pose, with the sword strikes maybe having a higher chance of hitting a particular enemy depending on where they are on the screen. As you're doing all this, moving the story forward and fighting and killing people, or fulfilling in-game challenges, you get points to spend on upgrades, but not just normal ones. Health, your key power, your guns, they all have different ways to upgrade them, like more rounds or electrical energy, and many others. It's not exactly new, but it works here. While Shadow Warrior, like its predecessor, doesn't do much new, it's not necessarily really trying to. It really is a sequel in name and game, bringing familiarity instead of a total refocus. However, that does lead me to one of the game's slight issues. It's only about 6 hours long, and the last level or two doesn't really end with an energetic cornerstone note that I was expecting. I really wish this game was a bit longer, because what is here to me was immensely enjoyable, but we had one or two sort of down levels. They weren't necessarily as good, and I think a lot of games have that, but it didn't get that chance, if it had been a little bit longer, to add in one or two more over-the-top levels. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. With this one, I'll say a couple things that work, a couple things that don't, and I'll give that rating. First, some things that work here. Shooting action feels great. I loved Wang's character. Trash Pandas, one of my favorite characters in this game that you meet. Some good surprises in the weapons. The platforming fits exactly where it should for a first-person game. It's generous with hit detection and flow. Some people may not like that. Not me. I think it worked to make him feel completely unique. Enemy variety in attacks, and while mixed in groups, it can require a good deal of strategy and not just running and gunning. And you guys know me, that super fast speed is what I like. Things that didn't work. The game's pattern rarely really lets up. It's platforming with minimal shooting interspersed with small areas to fight, and then after a couple of those, a boss battle. It's short also, let's face it. It could have done with another 2 or 3 levels, and I think that would have punched it up even more, because this doesn't have a great amount of replayability. You could go back and replay it for those challenges, but since it is sort of arena platforming boss, I'm not 100% sure a lot of people are going to return to it. So because this is on PlayStation Now, I say if you have that, for sure get it. If you don't, you may want to wait. It's not necessarily bad, it's just that it is quite short in length. If you're okay with that and not a lot of replayability, sure, maybe get it. But I would say wait, because it'll probably drop in price. And with a couple hit and miss levels, as well as how short it is, it's a hard sale. It is still a quality game, but it's not a lot of a quality game. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Always check Reddit. You can join the Patreon. It's an amazing place to be. We have cool games, streaming games, do some D&D, and you just help the channel. Peace out.